We're going to see the Sistine Chapel, obviously, which is the fourth part of our Vatican Museum experience. And I think from what you all can already realize, that it was a good idea not to do just one pilgrimage of the Vatican museums. There is quite a lot to see there. And so when we make our way here to Italy as usual, and then to Rome, to the Vatican, you know now that there are many treasures to be uncovered. So so here we have the map. You all are familiar with this at this point, I think, where we went in. If you remember, we went through the galleries, we went through the Pinacoteca, we did a lot of Raphael paintings. We actually skipped the line, and it's very fortuitous that we are having this pilgrimage today, because as far as I know, the museums will close again in a couple of weeks, or even in a week, because of the new restrictions by the government. So it's a good thing that we gather here today. We've seen the Pinacoteca, we've seen Raphael's Transfiguration, we have seen the long hallways, right? Remember that we visited the Tower of the Winds, that you can hear on the picture, kind of sticks out a little bit. And Deb has explained a little bit there that she's actually seen it, so that's nice. We've seen the Raphael rooms, if you remember that. That was our last tour. And today we're going to finally go to the Sistine Chapel, which is in this picture on the right bottom. So you can barely see the roof. You'll see a better picture of it from the outside later on, so don't worry about that. But here you have a great location, an idea of the location. And this picture is taken from St. Peter's Basilica, indicating that the Sistine Chapel is basically couched between the museums and St. Peter's Basilica, which effectively means that you do have to end in the Sistine Chapel, because that's literally the end of the museums. And then if we were to go back, we'd just go back exactly where we came from. So it's kind of an end point, right? And then you do a U-turn and you return. Now, the Sistine Chapel is located where it is because it needed to be accessible to, obviously, the Pope and all of the cardinals that during the conclave would visit. Many of them would celebrate their Mass in St. Peter's, or would celebrate in the chapel, and still do. So in the chapel, in the Pope's chapel, or in one of the chapels in the Vatican, and then would go to the Sistine Chapel. And so you can see the Sistine Chapel here. It's a second arrow from the left. So it's right there between, like kind of at the end of the museums, between St. Peter. So we are really going into the very heart of the church. And so we already are in the heart of the church, which is the Vatican. But we go even further. We go into like the right cavity of the heart, which is the Sistine Chapel. So you have an exact idea of what the Pope would have seen, in his personal chapel for the last 400 years. And that's what's really nice to think about, that the museums allow us today to really visit the inner sanctum, the inner most sacred place, the most sacred, chapel in the Vatican, and therefore in the world, because there's no Vatican, there's no other Vatican, there's no papal chapel just like it. So now, as we usually do, we pass by the exit of the Vatican Museum first. We go through the entrance, we skip the line, we skip the crowds, so that's very nice. And then we can go inside, and the first thing that we see, obviously, is the dome. And here I also always point out that behind the trees is the Sistine Chapel, right? It's right there. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to make straight our way to the Sistine Chapel. And there, the most important hero, or the second important hero that has made our kind of itinerary through the Vatican Museum possible, is Michelangelo. And naturally, Michelangelo Buonarroti. So this is one of the statues of him. That's not by him, naturally. And Michelangelo is the great giant here of the Sistine Chapel. Now, we have spoken about Raphael, so I can reference a little bit, not too much, but a little bit, and you have had an idea why Raphael is so important, why Raphael is so groundbreaking for the Renaissance, and why Raphael is the one that really defines the Renaissance in painting. Michelangelo is a little bit the sore thumb out, if you will, of art history, because, and specifically of paintings, because Michelangelo is not a painter. And this is something that we will see why that is significant in the Sistine Chapel. We'll see that today. So today, really the three great figures that we have to deal with and that we are encountering is Michelangelo. Furthermore, Pope Sixtus IV, and he is the one that constructed the Sistine Chapel, who had it built between 1473 and 1481. And then Pope Julius II. Julius II is significant because he is the one that gets Michelangelo to paint in the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel is his uncle's chapel, so he has not just a quote-unquote professional interest in touring in the in building the chapel or in restoring the chapel, but he has also personal interest because of his uncle. Right now, Julius II will not see this whole thing completed. There will be his successor, and then eventually, 40 years later, you'll have Clement VII giving the last commission to Michelangelo with the Last Judgment. That Clement VII also died. That will be finished under Pope Paul III. So I think there is 7 popes, really, the span of 7 papacies that make this chapel what it is. So mind you that not all of these popes, there's not just one pope. It's not one pope that commissions everything, builds everything, and then everything is done. And no, it's a progression, it's a progress, and it's a development that took years. It took literally decades. Mind you also that at the very end, in the very beginning, Michelangelo was a newcomer. He was a newbie. He was a kind of fresh off the boat, and he kind of came to Rome with nothing, and the Pope said, wow, this guy is a really great sculptor. Like let's get him on board. And at the end of the Sistine Chapel, he was so famous that even 500 years later, for us, he is still the epitome of a Renaissance painter. So that's quite the development. That is quite a reputation. And so there is a certain growth in Michelangelo himself, and you can see that in his painting, you can see that in his art, you can see that in his theological understanding even, and you can see that in his will to be the artist that he was meant to be. And I'm mentioning this before I speak for 1 second about the Sistine Chapel here. You can see that the last commission in the Sistine Chapel, so the Last Judgment, he wanted no theological counsel. He said, I want to have free hand. And the Pope granted that, which is incredible. And there are many books written, and maybe some of you have them, and that's fine. They got bestsellers, they became bestsellers, and all of that. There are many, many books that are written that emphasize the animosity between the Pope and Michelangelo. Like there are many books written that show the animosity between Raphael and the Pope. And like with Raphael, maybe I'm being too clement here in the reading, and Michelangelo was certainly a difficult character, but the Pope allowing Michelangelo just to have a free hand is incredible. Incredible. That we owe a huge gratitude to Paul III specifically and Julius II. Even with Julius II did have some theological influence, and he helped Michelangelo also to get a theological understanding. I mean, Michelangelo was a sculptor, for crying out loud. This is a guy who kind of, with a wife beater on, goes into a quarry and hacks at rocks. Like we don't necessarily expect him to understand all of the intricacies of the Trinity. Okay, this is
Jan,
something
I have a question. Do we imagine that perhaps that the Pope and Michelangelo had a conversation about like what it was, or is there any documentation on that?
Yeah, we do. The Pope actually commissioned him with something completely different. Julius II, well, I mean, at first he commissioned him obviously with his tomb, famously, but in the Sistine Chapel, the Pope wanted 12 apostles on the ceiling, for the very simple reason that it was completely unheard of to have a narrative on the ceiling. But Deb, let me hold on for 1 second. I'll just explain this, and then we can actually go inside, and then it makes more sense to explain what I'm about to explain. So what you can see here is the Sistine Chapel outside, and I bet you that most of you would not imagine this to be a church. Most of you will look at this and be like, yeah, okay, that's kind of it looks like a functional building. It looks like a castle at best,
Right.
And that's very much intentional. The Sistine Chapel was built to protect the Pope. And the windows that you see, so here it looks like the windows are on the bottom level. They're not. The windows are on the kind of first story. So you could not look through the windows. You could not shoot through the windows. And in fact, as you see, there's kind of a bulwark around it where soldiers could patrol. And this is not accidental. This chapel was built by Sixtus IV. It was refurbished. It was restored by Sixtus IV to protect the Pope. It was the easiest place to kill a Renaissance Pope was during the celebration of Mass. Okay, and so the Pope wanted to have a safe space where he did not have to think about who could lurk behind the window, who could lurk behind a pillar. Okay, he just wanted to go and celebrate Mass. And so that's, and because of the rivalries of the Renaissance families, sometimes there's a lot there at stake. So the Pope wanted to have protection. And so this is why the Sistine Chapel on the outside, anyways, doesn't really look like a chapel. What I may also point out here, this very significant, is that the Sistine Chapel has the measurements of the Temple of Jerusalem. Okay, so Solomon's temple. And this also is very intentional. It is the new temple, right? So it is like 130 feet long. It is 44 feet wide, and it is 68 feet in height. So it is 3 times as long as it is wide, which correspond, and all of those measurements correspond more or less exactly to the Temple of Solomon. So we are literally going into the most sacred space, the most holy space. And that's what we're going to do right now. So let's pop in without further ado, and then I can come back to Deborah's question. So the Pope wanted 12 apostles on the ceiling, which is something very normal. And this is something that Michelangelo would have been familiar with, where he, because you don't want a narrative on the ceiling. For the simple reason is you walk into the chapel and you don't look at the ceiling. You look at the altarpiece. And Michelangelo was not commissioned with the altarpiece. In fact, there were already paintings by Perugino on the wall that had to be scraped off before Michelangelo even had space for the final judgment. Okay, and then the walls were already painted. So the only thing that was left, the only space that was left was the ceiling. But it was obviously a huge ceiling. It's massive, massive. And so so the Pope said, well, come up with your 12 apostles, with your idea. And Michelangelo took the time and he came up with this incredible blueprint of what we're about to see today. And I think that is really worth stressing, that there's a lot of Michelangelo's creativity. So what we see now that we still have the total, okay, just kind of some focal points here. We see obviously the Last Judgment at the very end, where the altar is the papal altar. So it's an altar piece, okay. Above it, naturally, you have the ceiling. So you have Michelangelo's ceiling. Then you see the windows, and now you can see how the windows are really high up. So the windows are very high up, and then next, or rather in between the windows, you have the popes. And I'll speak about that later. So you have the kind of succession of different popes, not all of them actually, but some of them, the most important ones. And then below on the left, you have the Old Testament stories, the story of Moses. And then on the right, you have the corresponding New Testament stories. So on the left, you have Moses, you have all of what's happening with God and the different, and the Red Sea and Exodus and all of that. And on the right, you have that Old Testament promise being fulfilled by Christ. So you have the prophecy and you have the biblical event of the Old Testament, and then you have the fulfillment in the New Testament. So it shows already that there is a unity between the Old and the New Testament, something very Catholic, something very Christian naturally, and something that the Pope would have, and everyone for that matter, would have immediately picked up on it. He's like, okay, that's what Moses does, that's what Christ does, makes sense. Very good. Underneath that, you have painted draperies, right? So you have these kind of, they look like goldish or gilded. It's actually, it's just a painting. It's a wall covering. It's a decoration, and that's where those the tapestries would have been hung up. You remember, we saw the tapestries. We saw some of them last tour, and so that's the place where they'll be hung up. So you would have even another layer of paintings. Oh, sorry, of pictures underneath. So there's a lot to see. Okay, there's just a lot to see. Now the church is divided up in 2+1 parts. So it's the whole space is divided into 3 parts. Even though the photo doesn't really give that justice, but the part that we are standing in very appropriately is the part for the lady, and then there is a grid which is a separator between the sanctuary of the chapel and the lady. And then in the back you have the stairs, and the stairs go up to the papal altar. So you have 2/3 taken up for the clergy, which makes sense, cardinals gathering and all that. And then you have 1/3, the papal court, and then you have the 1/3 taken up for the lady, for those who can participate outside. And you close the door and you have the grid there, just as it is today, even in Eastern churches with the iconostasis. So you have the little grid separator. Very good.
One thing I'd like to point out, Jan, and you may go into this later. If you look at the Last Judgment and you look down below that, on the right-hand side, you'll see a door. And on the left-hand side, you'll see a door on either side of the altar. If we were visiting in the Vatican Museums today, you always enter in the door that's on the right-hand side of the altar. That is how you enter in. And then you're yelled at by the guards, quiet, not speak. You are standing shoulder to shoulder. And if you're lucky, you can get a seat on the side. There's a bench there along the walls. I don't know if you can see. It's hard to see. And you can sit there and you can try to take it in, but it's very difficult because there's so many people. And of course, the door on the left-hand side, I'm sure Jan's going to get into that door, which is the cry room, which is where the Pope goes after he is elected. So, and you always exit in a door that's in the space that we are standing in. So they move you through the Vatican, the Sistine Chapel. That's how they move you through. Again, remember, on a peak day in normal time, 30,000 people enter into this room. That's a lot.
That's very true. And therefore also it has to have a very good AC. It's actually the best air-conditioned room in the whole Vatican Museums, and it has a very modern AC, which is built by American engineers. 3 of them. They gave a press conference a while ago at this point, like maybe 8 years ago, under Pope Francis, though, where they had a new AC installed, which is infrared and video controlled. So they literally have a video camera counting the people, measuring the humidity every 5 minutes, and then adjust the AC so that the frescoes can are treated well and can survive for the longest time possible. All right. Okay, this is always the moment where I have to take a deep breath, because okay, so how I'm going to do this. This is always a challenge, because this is such a busy scene. Okay, such a busy thing, and most people get a headache looking at it, and I understand why. I understand why you would get overwhelmed. It is literally overwhelming. So let me tell you, and this is a preface that I like to do, so please forgive me, but whatever I'm going to explain today will be maybe 20% of what can be explained. There's just no way around it. And because there is so much, and I picked up the book of Heinrich Pfeiffer, who is the Jesuit priest that spent 45 years studying the chapel, and the fruit of those 45 years lifetime is that book that you also actually can buy in English. Heinrich Pfeiffer. I met him when he was 91, and he it's just every single thing has a meaning. Everything. But I don't want to overwhelm you, but I'm just saying that, okay? So no matter how much time we spend here, okay, there's only so much that you can explain. Now, Michelangelo and this is what I want to start with, was commissioned here, and he was a sculptor. Okay, he is the guy that Julius II wants to make a tomb with, a tomb monument that has 40 statues. That's what he wants. And so he brings Michelangelo to the Sistine Chapel. He says, "Can you paint something on the ceiling?" And Michelangelo says, "What part of like hammer and chisel did you not understand?" Okay. The thing is, what is the difference of a sculptor and a painter? And this is so crucial, just to have an initial understanding. The difference of a sculptor and a painter is the painter sees an empty space that he needs to fill up. He sees an empty canvas, he sees an empty wall, he sees an empty ceiling, and he says, "I'm going to fill this up with stuff, lots of stuff." The sculptor gets a block of rock, of marble or of whatever, and the sculptor says, "I have to get rid of everything superfluous. I have to get rid of everything that is not necessary." And now you say, okay, so it's kind of ironic that he, gives us this. It's like, yes, but what we see here is already the reduction to what Michelangelo considers the bare minimum. He has no landscape. He has no elaborate compositions. He has a painted architectural frame, the so-called inquadratura, so the framing, literally the framing, which is painted, and he has colors, and that's it. And you can see the progression even stronger in the Final Judgment, which the Final Judgment has only human bodies left. So Michelangelo slowly chisels away, cuts away everything that he finds superfluous in Renaissance art. And that's why I'm saying he is not like Raphael. He is really different. But what that means is it allows us to focus on the central, on the essential. And so what is essential for Michelangelo in the understanding of the world? Creation. And that is what we see. So from right to left, in the center rectangle, if you will, you have 3 times 3 stories. And all of them deal with Genesis 1 through 21, creation. So you have on the far right, God separating the dark and light. To the left, God creating the moon and the sun. Then God separating the waters on earth from the waters in the sky. Then that's 3. That's the creation of stuff. Then you have the creation of man, which is the creation of Adam, the creation of Eve, and the fall and the exile from the garden. That's the story of man. And then to the left, you have the sacrifice of Noah, the flood, and Noah's drunkenness. So the story of the covenant between God and man. As a first person, obviously, Noah. So you have creation of stuff, the creation of the universe, the creation of man, and the covenant with Noah. And then you have the surrounding figures, and there we have a lot. So it's kind of hard to keep track here. But if you want to start on the right top, there's a lady in yellow that has a book open, right? So that's the Libyan Sibyl, and now go counterclockwise. Then you have a man, that's Daniel. You have the Cumaean Sibyl, Isaiah, the Delphic Sibyl. Then you have on the left side Zechariah. Down below, Joel, Eritrean Sibyl, Ezekiel, Persian Sibyl, and Jeremiah. I'll show you the names in a second now. I just want to give you, that's what we're going to talk about today, plus the Last Judgment. Okay, so we're going to have these centerpieces. I'm going to explain in detail, and then you have that framing. And about the framing, you all now should understand something that you probably wouldn't have understood had we not do the Vatican tour, which is Michelangelo considers history to be both sacred and profane, Christian or Jewish and Hellenistic pagan. The Sibyls are are mixed in with the prophets. And that's that idea I mentioned very, very much in the beginning, that Christianity interprets itself, Christianity understands itself to be the truth for both. The truth on the philosophical level and the truth on the theological level. The Sibyls, for all that they're worth, sitting in their Greek caves and I don't know, smoking weed and toss a coin at them and they tell you what the future is. The Sibyls still said something true about human nature, and so did the prophets. So did Ezekiel. So did Joel. So did Daniel. And so Michelangelo frames the story of creation with those, for him, very important personalities. All right, so I think we can move on, and we can see the location of the ceiling, and then we can go to the actual details. Deb, do you have any questions here, or can we?
No, please go.
All right, so there you have the ceiling, and then it's important the ceiling kind of ends into the Last Judgment, right? So now we see the upper part of the chapel. I just want you to see that kind of continuation, and we'll speak about that. At the very end, then you have the Last Judgment, right? And so you have the creation, and then at the very end you have the Last Judgment. So if you move on, then you can see actually the Last Judgment, and here you understand you have the beginning of time and you have the end of time. You have Genesis 1 and you have the Apocalypse of John. You have the beginning of the Bible, you have the end of the Bible. You have the beginning of creation, you have the end of creation. You have the beginning of God's love story with man, ultimately, and you have the end of God's love story with man. So that's the framework. Okay, it's cosmic. It's cosmic, guys. Like there's no messing around. This is everything. He wants to tell us a story about everything. He wants to tell the Pope a story about everything. He wants to tell the cardinals a story about everything. Let's move on. I'll mention, we obviously talk more about the Last Judgment, but here's another shot of the ceiling. Okay, and then we can actually move on to the labels, so just that you know that there is a name for all of these things, and this may be a little bit overwhelming, and you don't have to memorize all of them. Don't worry about it. This is a great kind of a way of looking at it, right? So you have what I said in the beginning, right? You have the story of the creation, you have the Sibyls and the prophets, and then in those triangular what do you call them, cornices, like above the window, you have the ancestors of Christ, and then the reference to whatever their relation is. That's why it says family. And then you have in the round and the semicircles, you have the actual people that connect Christ to King David. So all members of the family from King David to Jesus Christ. Where can we find this? Does anyone know? Deborah, do you know? Well, we have the long list.
Oh, well, it's in the Old Testament.
It's in the Old Testament, that's right. And it is also in Matthew. In the first chapter of Matthew. Since Matthew talks about Christ as king, you have all of those lists there. And I think one reading in Mass throughout the year does do the whole list. And that's the reading where you just know, oh my gosh, this is going to keep going on. Because like this guy, beget that guy. And then this is the son of this guy. And this just keeps going. That's the whole reading. And you're like, oh boy. And what is that? That's the Gospel of Matthew. Anyways, I'll speak about this later. I just want to show you this nice slide, and you can see the progression. So let's move from God divides light from darkness on the right center part to all the way Noah drunk and disgraced. All right. Michelangelo is revolutionary in many ways. One of the ways that he's revolutionary is his depiction of God the Father. God the Father usually was shown as a circle or a triangle or a beam of light. At best, you have some liturgical art where he is shown as like a bearded old guy, and you just show the head. Okay, Michelangelo says, no, I need another type of God here. I need a different representation. And so he picks the two elements that he finds most important about God, and he depicts the symbolic nature of them. And that is the old man's head. So the head of the philosopher with a beard. So eternal knowledge, eternal wisdom, and a very powerful, very strong young man's body. Almost looks like Hercules. I mean, this God the Father spends a lot of time in the gym doing weights, right? He's very powerful. So he's almighty. Yeah, all wise and almighty put together. And so what is God doing? Before there is creation, before there's anything, God is dividing light from darkness. And again, if you have your Bible there, you can open it and you read it in Genesis. God is dividing light from darkness. And so Michelangelo says, before we can start telling the story, we need the canvas. And very fittingly, he makes God dividing lightness from dark in a smaller canvas as the actual frame allows. So he paints yet another canvas inside the canvas to make God separate dark and light. And God is literally pushing the boundaries outside. He's making space for creation. He's like, there is no space here. We need to make space. We need lots of light, and then the darkness will vanish. Because of that, we have now for the first time the separation of the 4 times of day. Okay, and so the 4 ignudi, as they're called, the 4 naked men, young men, are around it. So on the right bottom, you have morning, then right top, you have noon. On the left top, you have afternoon, that is resting after long days of work on his grapes, on his harvest. And then down below, on the left bottom, the man who pulls the curtain over his head is nightfall, right? So morning to nightfall. And it was the first day, as we know, right? Because God created. So we can move on, and we can see how God now, reference still this light and darkness, creates the sun and the moon. So you have God the Father who flies by. He creates the sun, a big circular or half circular body in the sky. And then behind him, right while he's doing it, he is creating the moon at the same time, right? So sun and moon somewhat are related. Now, we'll speak about the sun later on, but this is obviously the most most impressive depiction of God. God is concentrated. God is he is kind of all focused on this very, very important work, and he already has that creative hand, right? The hand that you know probably very well from the story of the creation of Adam, right? With his index finger extended, is already there. He is already the creator, not just in Adam, but he's already the creator of the sun and the moon. Now he flies by, and then he creates Earth and the plants. And the plants are seen just above the Inside the Vatican logo. So that you can see a little bit of green ferns growing there. And so that is God creating Earth. So you have the sun, you have the moon, and you have the soil with some plants. Plants are usually traditionally identified with the works of God, the good works of God. We all love a nice, beautiful flower. So there you go, a good work of God. Now, many people have commented on this, so I will bring it up because, and I always like to introduce it with this picture is not the origin of mooning, even though it's the creation of the moon. And because obviously the second time that we see God around, on the left, he has just a very well-defined, rounded, sculpted bottom, right? And it's right in our face. And so as you can imagine, that created all kinds of scandal and controversy during Michelangelo's time and today. And let me tell you, it is not as controversial as people say it may be, because Michelangelo knows his stuff. He knows his Old Testament. He knows his Abraham story. And what happens when Abraham says, hey, God, we have this deal, and like, it would be really cool to get to know you and to actually see you face to face. And what does God tell Abraham? Does he say, oh, yeah, we can talk, we can chat face to face? No, he doesn't say that. He says, no, if you see me face to face, you're going to die. You will die. You cannot see me face to face. So he says, go into that rock opening, go into the cave, and I'll walk by. And when I've walked by, you can look at my back. And so Abraham goes and he looks at God's back. And so the Vulgata translation, Latin translation, uses the word behind, posterior, which could literally also means like bottom. And Michelangelo's like, well, if we're supposed to see God like that, and we're supposed to see God like that. And it's just a gentle reminder by the artist that when all of this happened, none of us was conceived yet. We were not there. We were not there looking at God creating, and we're not really allowed to. This is a mystery. And while the artist is showing it to us, he is saying, he has a caveat, and he says, guys, make sure that you don't misunderstand where your place is. Your place is not to judge God and God's creation. Your place is you can stand in awe. And God lets you even look at him, but you have to be careful about it. Right? So he shows you God from a different angle, quite literally. So there you go. So that's the creation of the sun and the moon, and then the creation of the plants. Now, in this one, and this is again, this goes into all kinds of philosophical, Platonic, Neoplatonic speculation that we don't have to get into. This is the separation of the waters on earth from the waters in the sky. And this may be a little bit outdated, because you may say, okay, well, there are no waters on earth. There are no waters in the sky. It's like, yep, okay, well, maybe, but there are clouds. There is H2O kind of floating around, and could be considered as water. But there's another thing, another truth that Michelangelo wants to show us here. And that truth is that God is not alone, right? God is not alone. The next picture will be the creation of man. And if you remember, God says, let us create man. And that's weird. I mean, sure, God is talking in the majestic plural. I get that. But maybe there's something else. And Michelangelo says, remember, when God created, there was someone else there. And that's the Son. So if you look at God here, God the Father, who has his philosopher beard and his Herculean body, you look behind his left shoulder, and there's a little boy that it's like well-rounded, kind of like a little round body, couched next to the hand. And that obviously is the Son. God the Son. It's Christ. And even more so, God the Son's side, so that side of that red drapery that is very theatrically flowing in the wind, there's a lot of movement there of wind. Reminds you of something? Ah, yes.
The Holy Spirit.
You got it. That's it. So you have the Holy Spirit. You have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit creating. And the whole placement of that allows God to look back at creation. So when we move on, you can see that God looks back onto all three of his of those creative moments. So let's look at the next image. You can see that God is looking down. Can we?
Yeah.
There you go. That God is looking down. Okay, and he's not just looking at the waters. He's looking at what he has created, and he says, "This is good stuff." Paraphrasing by Jan Bentz. This is it. This was great. Okay, this is some good stuff. And then he turns, right? And then he turns, and something else happens. He says, "Okay, well, all of this is kind of not yet complete." Now, around God as a creator and as a separator, in the separation of the waters, you can see four naked people again, and so those are the four elements. And you can see on the right bottom, you can see earth. Right top is fire, very reddish skin. Left top is water, and the blue cape gives away the waviness. And left bottom, you can see it in the hair. Oh, it's Donald Trump hair. I just realized that. Okay, you have Donald Trump hair, which obviously is wind. So there you go. That's maybe where he got his haircut idea from, right? So you have the four elements, everything that creation is composed of, and God looks at it and says, this is good stuff. Great. But something's missing. So we move on to probably all of you know already the most famous, which is the creation of Adam. All right. Deb, anyone else, any questions up to this point?
I have a question.
Yes.
This particular image right here, we have, this shape?
Yes.
Is the shape of a human organ?
Not right? Quite. We'll get to that. We get to that.
Okay. So, but we have one, you talked about one, the Son,
yes.
But there's two people here.
Yes, exactly. So good point. Thank you for asking this. So behind God's left shoulder, as I said, is his son. On the other hand, there's a young girl who's blonde, and behind her is a young boy, almost even younger than that girl. And so, as you can imagine, those are already in the mind of God. That idea of Adam and Eve. So it's Eve actually taking the more dominant position in the front, and Adam is in the back. But they're still children. They're not the thought of God, the idea of God has not matured yet. Okay.
Right.
So that's that. And it's also there's another detail that I may point out. And again, you can spend a lot of time on each one of these, as you can see. The young girl looks into one of those kind of circular side panels, right? And it's empty. Right. What's very cool about this is that all of these side panels have their own little story. Okay, and this particular one's empty, but she's focused on it. Yeah, there you go. Oh, nice, you have a pointer. Okay, see, yeah. I need a pointer. I love pointers, so this is great. So you can look at it, and it looks like a sphere, right? Reminding us of the sphere of heavens, the sphericity, the roundness of all of that, right? God is not separating flat waters. There's a roundness. It's the only one that's empty. And it has that spherical shade. So Pfeiffer anyways interprets it as representing the sphere of heaven, which I like to repeat. So it's a nice little detail there as well. Thanks for asking that. So Adam and Eve, right? So we got to bring those out. Have them mature. So Michelangelo is a painter, as I said, and also is a sculptor. Is a sculptor turned painter, and Michelangelo is by all means not a philosopher or a theologian when he did this, but he did have lots of good input. And that input came mostly from the members of the court of Lorenzo de' Medici, Lorenzo il Magnifico, in Florence. And that's where most of his artist friends hung out anyways on their weekends. That's where they had their crazy get-togethers and cool, platonic parties, resembling the symposium. So, he went there. And in the middle of all of that, he was talking to the Neoplatonists, and he said, guys, like, hold my beer. Like, I need an answer for this. I need to paint Adam, right? And so I need to paint like this archetypical man. Like, I need a man. Like, what is a human being? And the philosophers, they said, well, it's intellect and will. Men are intellect. They're animals, but they have intellect and will, what animals don't have. And Michelangelo looks at them and is like, okay, now give me my beer back. That's not really helpful. Okay, I cannot really paint that. I cannot really paint will and intellect, or can he? So the composition he comes up with is an Adam that is in a position of a runner. Right? Of like, have you ever seen like Olympic Games of a runner? But it's kind of twisted, so it's not looking forward, but looking backwards. So it's still very lethargic, very tired. There's no energy yet. There's no life force. So the body is there, but there's no driving life force. What's that life force? Yes, that's the soul. So God here doesn't technically create Adam. He gives Adam the soul. And we don't even see that moment. Remember, I spoke about this for those who were part of that. I mentioned during the Pietà explanation that Michelangelo is the artist of the moment before. It's the Renaissance, not the Baroque. You don't get the money shot. You don't get the action scene yet. You get the scene where everything is in super, 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 super high tension, just about to explode, right? It's the panning of the camera out before the house blows up, right? In a modern movie. And so that is the moment just before God will insert the soul. So Adam is kind of languidly waiting for it, and God is flying in this very powerful pose, dominating pose, very fitting to God the Creator, with flowing hair, and he is just about arriving on time. It's kind of floating there in like a helicopter, like boom, he just gets there, and there he gets the soul. And Michelangelo just pauses the scene before he inserts the soul, and he says, "Here you go," and that's what I'm going to paint. So he gives Adam a soul made of intellect and will. Now that's what's interesting, and that's I think what Deborah was alluding to. But one second before I go that, because I can show you, we have another picture. A God has his arm around a young girl who's now more matured than she was before. Okay, sorry, can we stay back? Sorry, one second. So that's the blonde-haired girl, and that is obviously Eve. So God already thinks of Eve when he is thinking of Adam. And then you have his hand resting on the little baby. And, Christmas is getting closer. You can imagine what baby that is. That is his own son. He knows when creating man, he gives him free will. And free will means that there is possibility for sin, and sin actually will happen. So he'll need to send his own son. The whole scene is also, by the way, seen by the demons. And so underneath God's right armpit, basically, you see a face in darkness that is not super happy with everything that's going on. And that's the devil. That's Lucifer, who will fall and who will give rise to that rebellion of angels, right? So that's that face that is kind of under God's right arm in darkness in the back. He's still part of creation. The devil was once a good created angel, but he fell out of his own free will again. And so there you have that tragic moment. Now, going back to the idea of intelligence. So God, creates the soul and he gives it intelligence. And in order for Michelangelo to show that, God's cape, the red cape, is in the form of a human brain. So moving on, we can see that it is actually anatomically amazingly correct, right? With the spinal cord and the pituitary gland and all of that, and all of the legs conform. All of what's hanging out conforms to all of the parts of a brain. This was actually found by kind of fun trivia fact by an American scientist in 1980. Richard Meshberger, who wrote an article on this for the Medical Journal of America, or some of America's Medical Journal. So you can see God flying in a huge dissection of a brain, giving Adam this little piece of that brain, a little bit of intelligence, not omniscience by all means, not omnipotence by all means, but a little spark of it. So man now is truly an image of God. He has free will. He's not a slave, and he has intelligence. He can know. So I thought this is great. It's really hard to explain this or to make it credible when you're actually inside the chapel, because some people just don't see it. But here you have it. That's exactly the brain. So I always love that. Okay, so Adam is now alone. So God, as you know, creates the next best thing, which is Eve, right? No, he was only practicing for Adam, we know that, and then he actually makes the perfect human being, which Michelangelo already alluded, because the creation of Eve, my friends, is the center of the Sistine Chapel, not the creation of Adam. It is the woman that is in the center of creation, not man. Why?
Mary.
Because of Mary, because of the Immaculate Conception. Michelangelo was a third order Franciscan, and he would already have that idea. They already venerated Mary. They already had this idea of the Immaculate Conception, of the sinless creation, of that one person that made it, the one person that did not pick the apple. And that is the one that is kept from sin, and that is Mary, who obviously also is the gate of heaven, allowing Jesus to be born. So God is already tired, right? I love this. It's such a great, it's not a crude realism. It's just a very realistic realism, for lack of a better word. It's like God is just tired. He's like, okay, 6 days, guys. Like, I created a lot of stuff. I need to take a nap. Okay, so come on, like, hurry up, come out. And so he is like having his hand there, resting. He's tired. He's like, I'm falling asleep. Come on. And Eve steps out of Adam's side where the rib is, right? She steps out. God takes the rib and creates Eve. And so Eve comes out, and there she is in all of her glory. And she is right in the middle of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Just bam, just right there. Amazing. So there you have the culmination of creation. Eve is not the culmination of creation, but she is the prefiguring, right? She is the Delphic Sibyl that comes before Mary, right? The Immaculate Conception. So it's a nice interplay, and I love that when people like, oh yeah, the church is so much against women. It's like 500 years ago they had a woman in the center of her ceiling. Like, that's a papal ceiling. Okay. Anyways, I think people just don't look at it as specifically enough. So we're getting a yes. So Joseph Raguso made a comment saying that Michelangelo did study cadavers. That is correct. And yes, he dissected them. That was actually illegal in Rome. So he needed to go to Florence for that. So after his wild Neoplatonic party in the court of Lorenzo de' Medici, he went to a morgue. He probably paid a very fine sum, and then he could dissect people. So he could learn about muscle, he could learn about brain and all of that. So that's fun. That's what an artist does in his free time, right? Oh yeah, I'm just gonna dissect that brain. Yum. Okay. Now the next picture then is the last picture in the cycle of men, and there is no story of men without the story of the sin. So you have this image of the Garden of Eden, and you have it twice. There are two images basically, which is the one on the left, which is pre-fall, and the one on the right, which is post-fall. And here again, we see Eve as the central figure, because Eve before the fall, she's the one sitting on the ground naturally, is young, beautiful, radiant, just pretty. And then you see her again on the right side, and she is couched together, she is crunched together, she is old, she is wrinkly, she's ugly. In a matter of minutes, right? So that's what sin does. And that's the whole idea of Oscar Wilde and the picture of Dorian Gray. See sin, would we still sin as we do? And here Michelangelo makes sin visible. She shows the effects on the flesh of man in Eve. And as much as Eve is the prefiguring of Mary, Eve also has to bear the burden of sin on her shoulders, because there needs to be salvation. And Eve grabs the apple, even though there's no apple here. So what's interesting is that this gives us a clue that goes all the way back to the Pietà. Why the Pietà is so young, so spotless, so beautiful? Well, precisely because Michelangelo says there is no sin. And if there's no sin, there is no wrinkle, there is no age, there is no sickness, there is no fault, right? So, and then obviously you have the Archangel Michael here, kind of holding the sword to Adam's neck, like, okay, get out of here, get out of Eden. So, nice little detail. Okay, so the next set of 3 paintings is the story of Noah, and that's a little bit easier to understand or to point out. So the first one is the sacrifice of Noah, which happens after the flood, right? So you have the sacrifice of Thanksgiving. You can see Noah there by the altar and the ram being slaughtered and all of that. The one after that is the flood of Noah, and you can see the Ark of Noah in the back. Okay, this is the last one, which is the drunkenness of Noah. So you have Noah, as you remember, with sweat and in toil you should earn your bread, right? That's the consequence of sin. And you can see Noah working in the back, when he was dressed, and then after that hard days of work, he goes to the barn, he gets all drunk, and he passes out on the ground. That glorious man, right? That just and we encountered in Adam, right? In the same position now, in the same position as Adam, is on the ground, drunk, after a hard days of work, not getting his stuff together. Right? So there is the fallenness of man in all of its quote unquote glory. And last but not least, we have.
I have a question.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
It looks like this particular area has some parts of this painting missing, and I don't recall that though. Is
yes.
Okay.
It does. That's a good observation. I usually point it out at the very end, usually of my explanation, because it's a detail. But yes, this is a part that very tragically was destroyed during the Napoleonic War. When Napoleon was in Rome, obviously the Pope had to mobilize weapons and all of that. And so the powder kegs were apparently stored in Castel San Angelo, which is pretty far, but not too far away from the Sistine Chapel. And so apparently one of them exploded at a very unfortunate moment in time and shook that explosion was so strong that the wave made the Sistine Chapel shake, literally shake. And so that piece fell off. Now you ask maybe, well, why did this piece fall off, not like a piece of, I don't know, the creation or whatever? Why is it this piece? The simple answer for that is that Michelangelo did not paint in chronological succession. So he started painting with Noah, and that's why also the figures are much smaller and much more detailed. And later on, Michelangelo kind of stepped down and he looked up and he's like, wow, you can't see any of that. Like you cannot see the detail. So he's just stopped putting that much detail in him, because he's like, well, you can't see it from the bottom anyways. So here you still had the detail, and so he painted it earlier. And he was not, since he was a sculptor, he was not really familiar with fresco. And fresco is, as you know, ground up stone, so ground up dust, basically, right? Marble or stone ground to dust that you mix in with an adhesive, whatever it may be, and that you stick on the wall. Now, if you do it too dry, it doesn't stick. If you do it too wet, it molds. So what we imagine to happen is that he did it too dry, or maybe it molded on the inside, and that particular piece was loose. It's not a guaranteed answer, but anyways, that piece fell off already like 200 years ago. So they just, in the restoration during the 80s, they just kind of left it empty. But good point. Yes, it's nice. Okay, see, I can even show you something new. That's good. All right, and then we have the flood of Noah. Again, lots of tiny figures. Michelangelo kind of scrapped that idea, and he's like, okay, no, I cannot paint here like I do on walls, or like they do on walls. He focused the attention more on fewer figures, but this is obviously very populated, very kind of, there's a lot going on here. And then you have the Ark of Noah in the back, which basically just looks like a barn, not even like a ship. So he basically scrapped all of that movement, and he focused in the action on a couple of individuals. All right, so again, we have the creation of stuff, we have the creation of the cosmos, we have the creation of man, we have the sacrifice of Noah. Here is something that I wanted to put in for those who were on my Raphael tour. I told you that Raphael copies Michelangelo's style. He paints a portrait of Michelangelo as Heraclitus, and he does it in reference to Michelangelo's painting style, but even in reference to the Sistine Chapel. Do you remember? Those of you who were on my tour may remember that. And so here I can show you the one next to the other. So on the left, you have Raphael's Heraclitus that sits in the middle of the School of Athens on the ground, if you remember. And on the right, you have Isaiah. And that's the movement that I explained, right? So Michelangelo is still thinking, is still contemplating, and then he has the idea, right? The muse kisses him, and he as a painter, he's like, oh, that's it. And he paints the Sistine Chapel. So a beautiful homage by Raphael to Michelangelo, and I always like to point that out. All right, now our two anchor figures connecting this ceiling to the walls is on the one hand Zechariah, right? Zechariah, who is very arduously reading the old prophecies, and then on the other side, perfectly on the other side mirrored, is Jonah. And Jonah is very central. I think we have mentioned it already before, but Jonah is a prefiguration of Christ, because Jonah is the prophet that gets swallowed up by the whale. And since Michelangelo has never really seen a whale, he just painted a gigantic fish in the background. Okay, big fish that he probably just got from the harbor that day, and then probably fried for dinner. and then he gets spit out, right? Jonah gets spit out by the whales after 3 days in his belly. So he comes back prefiguring Christ. All right. In the next image, you can see how Jonah really connects the two. So connects the sealing with the Last Judgment. And so let's look at the beautiful Last Judgment. Deb, anyone else for that matter, any questions? I can open the chat to see if there's anything. How was Michelangelo painting all this 100 feet off the floor? Good question. He didn't. He built a scaffolding, right? So in the beginning, he had a scaffolding where he would stand on, and his neck pain and his headaches and his sore shoulders and just the blood kind of leaving his arms while he was painting gave him such a big headache that he said, no. And so he built it even closer to the ceiling so that he could paint laying down, which makes sense. It's very practical. But on the other hand, imagine that you have to paint like Jonah, like an 8 feet figure from like this close up. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. He had to, and he didn't constantly go back and forth onto the ground to see what it looked like. He couldn't. So he had to see the proportions. He had to have those ready in his mind. Like, I don't know, like Beethoven had a symphony ready in his mind before he wrote it down, and then he painted it, right? Really incredible. So yeah, he had scaffolding, and that's also why Pope Julius II was so mad, because you couldn't see the progress. So he came in every day, kind of like knocking on the scaffolding, like, Michelangelo, like, how far are you? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Michelangelo's like, Jesus, no, like, I'm going to need 5 years for this. Like, stop coming. Give me some coffee. Good. There's another question. But did he know that how? Did he not know he would paint the Last Judgment when he painted Jonah? Right? No, he did not. He did not know that he would paint the Last Judgment. Now there were some alterations to the wall in general. Jonah was not one of them, but Jonah is just a nice connection point to the Christ that would be on the altar down below. So if nothing else, Jonah would connect the story of creation to the story of Mass that is going on the floor, or on the floor level at the same time. So I think the connection still makes sense. Great. Okay. Now you see the Last Judgment. So thank you for those questions. First of all, you see the Last Judgment. And there's truly a lot going on here. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of details, but before I show you the details, you need to get the grand picture. And the grand picture is Christ crucified on the altar. And you really cannot show this image without having the cross there. You can't. It's the anchor. It's the anchor of this whole painting, because that is the cross, which is, by the way, contemporary. It's attributed to Donatello. We don't know that though. So it's about 450 years old. That cross says, and on that cross, Christ says, "This is what I have done for you." And then you look up, and there you have the judging Christ. And the judging Christ says, "What have you done for me?" And that's really the anchor point. Now, the whole final judgment is kind of a composition, right, that comprises many groups of saints. I think, Mary, you need to blow up the slideshow again because now we can see you, but not the.
Right, hold on.
I can also explain the living room, but don't know much about it.
There it is. No.
All right. Bob says that maybe Deborah's connection has cut off. That's possible. So Mary, if you just want to bring that up, that'd be great. This little interlude also allows me maybe just to thank you all for all of the tips that I've received so far. So I really, really appreciate it, especially in these times. And please consider contributing a tip again also to keep this project going, right? So again, as we said, 20% go to Inside the Vatican, and who make all of these possible, and then I'll get the rest. So if you have not tipped yet, or if you want to tip maybe a little bit again, then I will not say no to that. Okay, advertising break end. Now
Sorry.
we see the composition, and so it's very busy. Okay, it's very busy. There's 351 new people here, but it is broken down very easily in 3 big segments. The left bottom is earth and the resurrection of souls. The center is heaven, and the right bottom is hell. If you remember what Deborah said before, we enter through the right door, which is kind of funny because you enter literally through hell and go into the Sistine Chapel. Now, that was obviously not the case when Michelangelo painted this. Both of these doors would be used just as practical connection points. So it was not built for tourists or made for tourists, but that's just how it is. So you enter and you go through hell, right? So that's the big point. So it has a circular composition, and I will speak about this at the end. Okay, I'll show you something that I think you may find very interesting. But just remember that, right? It starts on the left bottom and it goes counterclockwise. No, sorry, it goes clockwise from the resurrection to the judgment and down below to hell. Now, who do we encounter in the Last Judgment? Well, we encounter the judge. So moving on, we can see that there is Christ, and he is not the mellow son of a carpenter anymore. He is now turning away, and he says, talk to the hand. Face won't listen. No, he says, I want to save you.
Oh.
Jan?
It looks like he lost power.
Yeah, I had lost power as well. We will wait a moment. What's really important about this particular image blowing up is that you can see how Mary, I've been in there many times, and one of the explanations that really touched me was how Mary is, of course, lower than Christ, but she's turned away. She intercedes for us when we're here. She's our mother, our spiritual mother here while we are here on our pilgrimage to our Lord, to Christ. And once we're there, she turns away. She can no longer intercede. We are there facing him at our judgment. And I love that image for that reason. It shows that, of course, she's lower than Christ. She's turned away. And we now are there facing the judgment on our own. She has done her part for us on our pilgrimage in this life. And it's really quite something to be in there and to reflect upon that. Mary, while we're waiting, did Jan go back? Did he show the dark spot on the Last Judgment?
I don't think so. Do you want to go back?
Yes, let's go back. He's restarting. His circuit broke. Same as mine. He's restarting his modem. So if you can go back right here. So if you look, I don't have the pointer, but if you look on the left-hand side of the painting, just above, it's above hell in the blue area. There's a black square. Can you see that, Mary? You might be able to get the pointer and point that out. That is so again, it's if you go to the door on the bottom left, you go just above it and you go up maybe about, a fifth of the painting, and you'll get to the blue area along the side, and you will see a black rectangle. That is what the Last Judgment looked like before renovations. So
where's the pointer?
That's okay. It's okay. Before renovations. And so it really, can you imagine that when they opened it back up and they revealed the Last Judgment after it had been renovated, you can also see on the other side, there's another black area about a little bit lower against the wall. They left that there so people could really have a great appreciation for the restoration of this artwork. It was quite remarkable. Again, that is the papal cry room to the lower left. And of course, the lower right is where you enter into the Sistine Chapel. The lower left is where all the papal vestments are kept. So even now, I've been in the Sistine Chapel after Holy Week. It was, I think, the Tuesday after or the Wednesday after. And we watched them on huge gold trays, bringing all of the papal vestments into the Sistine Chapel to store them again into the cry room, the papal chapel, that's the Pope's sacristy. So that's where all of his vestments are kept even till today. That's where he gets robed after he is elected Pope. And that's why they call it the cry room. And I do believe Jan is joining us again. He's in the waiting room, Mary. If you could admit him. I got it.
I can't. I'm sharing my screen.
Okay, I've got that.
Sorry.
I think I admitted him. So I think we could probably fast forward now, Mary, back to where we were. I think Jan is joining us again.
Hi, yes, I am sorry about that. Sorry, everyone. But the power actually went out, which meant I just sat in darkness all of a sudden, and obviously my modem went off. So apologies. All right, we're back. Thank you for your patience. Good. So talking about judgment and darkness. There you go.
Exactly.
So right.
Same thing happened to me. So there you go.
Nice. Good. So Christ says, talk to the hand. No, he didn't say that. He says, I want to save you. And he illustrates that with his left hand that is right around, kind of circled around his wound that he received on the cross. His right hand is lifted up in a very kind of powerful judging motion. And it is so powerful that even Mary turns her face away. She can barely take it, just the majestic glory of her son, who is her son, but who's also God, and who will be the judge of all of us at the end of times. So the whole picture then gets its axiality from those two hands, right? You have those who are saved and those who are condemned. Michelangelo, and maybe now, and I'm sure that most of you won't remember, and I don't worry about it. The very first picture that we saw Last Judgment, right? And heaven was very small, was 1/3, and hell was 2/3. Here in the Last Judgment of Michelangelo, that is reversed. Most of the painting, 3/4, are taken up by heaven. 1/4, if any, it's probably less than 1/4 actually, is taken up by hell and by purgatory. So that's something I think that should be noted. And then there is something else that is revolutionary in Michelangelo. So there are three things. This was one. He shows mostly heaven and just a little bit of hell. That should not take away from the kind of majestic glory of the judge, but that's just how he decided to depict it. The second that is revolutionary is, for the first time in the Renaissance, you do not have a portrait of Jesus. Remember, Michelangelo knew what Jesus looked like, because 300 feet south, he had the Veil of Veronica right there. Every single icon in the West is based on that Veil of Veronica. Every depiction of the Renaissance is based off Veronica, of an icon. Michelangelo says, no, I will not do that. Can be speculation about why, but fact is that he chose the face of the most beautiful statue that he could come up with. And that is the Apollo Belvedere. So I can show you how his face resembles that of the Apollo Belvedere. So we can go, move on here, and here you can see it, that's his face. Not just that, he actually bases the body, okay, with that very clear twist on the Belvedere torso. Two things that we actually have seen together in the Vatican before. So he puts together two ancient pagan statues to create this Christ. It's not a Christ that is a portrait, but it is a Christ that is identified by his powers. Okay, so you're supposed to not see the liturgical Christ, but you're supposed to see the Christ in his glory, in his divine glory. And Michelangelo got a lot of flack for this, a lot of flack. So this was not a light decision, but that's the decision that he took. In that sense, he's also revolutionary. I will mention the third revolutionary aspect, but not yet. Suspense, right? Suspense. But let's look at a couple of other details first. Let's look at the angels of the apocalypse, which are in the center of the Sistine Chapel, final judgment, just below Christ. So we move on, we can go and we can see that they are the angels of the apocalypse. Moving on. And you can see that there Michelangelo, because he's a courteous artist, does reference that he is very well aware of the traditional way of depicting heaven and hell, that heaven is actually smaller than hell. Because on the left, you see an angel in the front holding a small book, that is the book of the saved. On the right, you see, facing hell, the book of the damned, which is large. Does anyone, maybe Deb or Mary or anyone else, know why heaven is traditionally, why hell is traditionally double the size of heaven in art? It's a hard one. No idea? All right. It is because the path is narrow. Yep, we just got an answer. The path is narrow, exactly. But what concretely do artists reference? They reference the fall of the angels in the first book of the Apocalypse, very beginning, anyways. Maybe not the first book, but the very, very beginning, where John sees that the dragon in the sky sweeps off 1/3 of all stars, and those are the angels that become demons. And in a very literal fashion, artists have said, well, so God can fill up, space, and how much in proportion is how much of space is freed in heaven? It's 1/3. So you have 1/3 that now takes the place of the angels, and he fills it up with saints, whereas 2/3 are, in proportion, are condemned. It's a very kind of a strange way of doing it, but that's just what enters in art. And you can often see Peter, who has the book of the damned, and it's 3 times the size of the book of the saved. It's just what it is. So Michelangelo knows it. He references, and that's what we see. It's a tiny, tiny book, kind of like a pocket novel, right, with the names of the saved, and then you have a gigantic atlas with a book of the damned. Anyways, so those are the trumpet angels. Furthermore, and this is what I always love to point out, is the damned soul, right? The damned soul that Michelangelo puts in, which is very famous. It made its way on postcards and on other picture books. It's maybe one of the most famous ones. And that soul is actually not damned, because that is the part of Purgatory. Yes, there is Purgatory. And you can see that very clearly in Archangel Michael, who's wearing yellow, and he is punching down a soul, right? And next to him, which is outside of the picture, is another angel. That's the same thing. There are 2 angels holding a guy, punching him in the face. What is interesting is they are not damned. They're not, because that soul that is falling, that is getting his kind of retribution by the Archangel Michael, is being held by a demon on the bottom who tries to drag it down. But the Archangel Michael also holds him up. And the same is true in 3 other instances where angels are actually holding the person up, that they kind of give a good beating, like a mother with their child. And one of them actually gets slapped on the behind they're not damned. They are being purified. So Michael does not let that that demon drag the soul down, but he does say he's going to let him, he's going to let go, have him go at it, right? Kind of give him a little bit of a punching so they can be purified for heaven. And that has been widely interpreted as purgatory, right? As we all know, we need purification. Even if we die in a state of grace, then we need purification because we need detachment from all of our worldly attachments. So that's just another cool detail. And then two more figures, which Michelangelo takes from the Divine Comedy. One of them is the ferryman, is Charon, that brings the souls over the rivers.
I've been watching some visuals of the Vatican Museum, the Sistine Chapel.
Oh.
So what are you up to? I haven't talked to you for a while.
Okay, I think you have to mute yourself. Thank you. So you have Charon kind of beating the souls over the river Styx into hell, right? So that's what we see here, and Michelangelo gets this straight from the Divine Comedy. And another one where we have to skip the next one, moving on 2 pictures, you have Minos, the judge of hell. So if you can go to that, please. And there you have the judge of hell, who, whenever someone goes to hell, wraps his tail around himself as many times as circles that the soul is being cast down into hell. And that is straight up from Dante's Divine Comedy. Now, there was one man who was not super happy with Michelangelo's Last Judgment. And that is not Pope Paul III, under whom it was finished, but is his master of ceremonies, Biagio di Cesena. Poor guy. His name would probably have never entered history if not for this. So he called Michelangelo to the Pope. He called him a tavern painter, which basically means a pornographer. And so Michelangelo, he said, what? And so he went back and he did the artist retribution. So he put him in, and the face is in fact the face of Minos. So it's a portrait that is obviously disfigured, right, with his tooth sticking out and the donkey ears. And in this case, the snake wraps around twice, which is the circle of the carnal sinners. So Michelangelo also does a little bit of a side note saying, Biagio, if you have a problem with naked men or with naked people, then that's your problem. You have to work on that, right? Good. Now, if you can go one back, because then we can talk about the third revolutionary aspect of Michelangelo. This is one of the 3 studies that we have of the Last Judgment. And here I want to show you that Copernicus was actually not the first one that said that the sun is in the center of the universe. It was Michelangelo, about 70 years before the De Revolutionibus was published, which is Copernicus's work. Michelangelo conceived Christ as the center of the fresco. And as the center, I mean the middle. Everything revolves around Christ. Now, Christ is the sun, like the sun, like the big ball of fire, sun. And that he takes from Neoplatonic speculation. And we know this because it's written on it, and contemporary Platonists have written on it, that Christ is the sun around which everything revolves. So 10 years before scientists, specifically Copernicus, had the mathematical and physical formulas to express this belief that the sun is in the center, because of theological insight on what Christ is, the center of creation, the center of the world, the center of history, the center of the cosmos, the Platonists, more specifically the Neoplatonists in Florence, knew this already. There's a study written on this where you can read this up in grand detail, but you can see how this composition is circular. It is circular because Christ is throning in the middle of that circular movement. So in that sense, Michelangelo is also a revolutionary. Now I'm going to wrap up by closing and by pointing out one more thing. So if we go to the two pictures further on, you can see the wall. And here we can see the grand project that Michelangelo set out to do and that he actually did, which is, you see the creation on the ceiling, you see the Last Judgment on the wall, you see the Old Testament generations from David to Jesus connecting. Underneath that, you see the popes who, from the birth of the church up until your time, our time, are a continuous succession. And obviously then you have the pictures of Moses and Jesus supplementing this Old Testament, New Testament kind of fulfillment. So what we see, ladies and gentlemen, is the whole history of the cosmos from the beginning to the end and our place. The place that happens when there's a new pope elected. The new pope will be, so right now we have the 266th pope in continuous succession, leading back to Christ, who is the Alpha and the Omega of history. And whenever the cardinals gather in the Sistine Chapel to elect the Pope, that's what they should think of. They are, for all of their petty problems, the center of the whole salvation history, which is in fact the center of all history of man. And in this very chapel, that historic election, that historic chain is continued, that from Christ on till our day continues the unchanged teaching. And Michelangelo beautifully understood that by picking this first and last moment of history, and then all of the side panels, all of the popes and the generations, and he kind of embraces, right? And I have this, sorry to make a kind of a pop culture reference, but I had this conversation over and over with modern movies who oftentimes just remake movies from the 80s, but they're kind of designed as sequels, but they kind of destroy the original narrative. And here you have the best example of making a sequel. Michelangelo paints stuff, the beginning and the end of the world, that beautifully embrace everything that has already been painted before. And he doesn't say, no, all of this is old, or all of this, I have to come up with something new. He says, I'm going to give you the larger framework. There's Moses, and there's Christ, and there's the popes, sure. But what was there before, and what will there be after? And there you have it, the whole history of the world unfolded. And with that, I think I can close. I don't know, Deb, maybe you want to say something about the
content. I wanted to say, Mary, if you could please move to the next slide, because it shows it's a great image that really shows the conclave, as well as the Last Judgment, as what you were just explaining.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. So you have the cardinals all gathered, and as it looks now, this picture is pretty old, but it still looks the same. And then this is obviously then also the moment where the museums close, at least the Sistine Chapel, and you cannot go in anymore. And we're being kicked out, right? And so that is the last picture, which is the so-called extra omnes, everyone out. And maybe that's actually a good place to end the tour. I don't want to kick you out, but we're all being kicked out together.
Well, it would be a real tour of the Sistine Chapel if we did get kicked out, because that's pretty much from the moment they come in, you come in, enter, you were yelled at to be quiet, and then you're told to move on.
That is very true. So luckily, we had no one yelling at us. You just had me yelling at you, or at the screen rather. But this was a great experience. So with that, also we close our section on the Vatican museums. Now, there's many more.
John, I don't know if you covered why I had my electricity problem. But for those who wonder where the actual oven or stove burner is for the ballots, when we looked at actually, he's closed. Monsignor, this is Monsignor Marini, I believe. Yeah, and he is closing the doors. And so he's standing in the laity portion of the Sistine Chapel. If we were to step inside those doors and turn to the left, so we are in the very back of the Sistine Chapel at that point, that is where you would find the stove that they then burn the ballots. So, of course, it's not there on normal days, but during the conclave, of course, it is. And that is, Monsignor Marini was there under Pope Benedict. He's been there for a long time. So you will see on a papal mass this Monsignor next to the Pope. He's the one who just makes sure the liturgy goes well. He knows how to handle a papal liturgy.